Tonight's topic is actually our first Solomon actual program tonight. So soon we'll hear from our speaker, who I'll introduce. But we're talking about character. You had a lot of time to think about it. Talk about it tonight, I guess, again, with your mentors. But the Torah talks a lot about character. In fact, last week we read in the Parsha something very fascinating. We hear about a private conversation that God is having with himself, which is very unique. God talks to himself, and the Torah tells us about this conversation. If you remember when we talked about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it says that God says to himself, should I destroy the two cities without consulting the one that I love, the one that is the future, Abraham. And our rabbis ask, why is he going to have this conversation with himself? Why are we getting privy to that information, and what was he trying to send a message? So first and foremost, as we see from the argument that Avraham Avinu made, was number one, would you destroy the righteous with the wicked? And we know that there's going to be always in life, unfortunately, more wicked than righteous. And if that's the case, how are you promising me that my child, my progeny, my future, Yitzchak and his family, and the continuation of the Jewish people will be able to have an impact on the world? Because if they're a minority amongst the nations, if they're a minority amongst the good people, and they will never survive because you're going to destroy the righteous with the wicked, then what's the future that I hold, and what's the future of the Jewish people? And then he says, and even more than that, he says, even if you don't destroy the righteous with the wicked, the question ultimately is, can the righteous actually have a positive effect on the wicked? Which means, does the power of good have the ability to transform evil? Can we go ahead and influence others to do well and to do good, even though we're a smaller number? And God reassures Avraham Avinu, absolutely. I won't destroy the righteous with the wicked. If we find righteous people, I won't destroy them. And a matter of fact, if you show me that if there's righteous people in these cities, their merit and their influence will be enough to go ahead and prevent the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, obviously, that's a message that God is giving to Abraham about his child Yitzchak, that even though Yitzchak is going to be a minority, number one, I won't make sure that he doesn't die. But number two is that it will give the power to Yitzchak to know that he could always influence even the people that are around him that may be wicked. But why does he have this conversation with himself that we get privy to? Is because the Torah wants to tell us the nature, the character of Avraham Avinu, Abraham. Abraham is not a defender of just the Jewish people. Abraham was a defender of morality. Abraham was a defender of justice. He was a defender of ethics. He was somebody who stood strong, fought for the evil people of Sodom and Gomorrah, went to war to save even the hostages that were not necessarily very holy. That's what Abraham's character was. And what do we see right after we hear about the tragic passing of Sarah in the beginning of this week's Parsha? That he says, if my child Yitzchak is going to survive as a righteous person, and he will have the power to influence others, I need to make sure that immediately I find a good wife for him, a good partner. And then the Torah goes into a lengthy discussion about sending Eliezer, the messenger of Abraham, to go find a wife for Yitzchak. And we hear the story 3 times. Contrast that with putting on tefillin. It says, Ukshatam la'ot al yadecha, v'hayu l'totafot beinecha. Literally 2 lines. Tie it on your arm as a sign, put it between your eyes. What? Black, leather, straps. What's inside the tefillin? Nothing. That's in the oral Torah. The Torah is very succinct. The Torah doesn't spend a lot of time giving us a lot of adjectives. But yet, when it comes to the story of Abraham sending Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak, the Torah says the story 3 times. Number one, when he makes the condition with God, and what kind of woman would be the great one for Yitzchak to marry, when the story unfolds, and then when he repeats the story 3 times in great length. And what is the main message that Eliezer is looking to impart, the Torah is looking to impart? What kind of person? A person of character. I want to know that the woman that's going to marry Yitzchak doesn't have to be wealthy, doesn't have to be powerful, doesn't have to be beautiful, although it says that she was. He was looking for somebody with character. That I'm coming here thirsty, and I want her not only to ask me to drink, but to give it to my servants to drink water, and to give my camels to drink. So the Torah spends so much time talking to us about the stories in the Torah about the righteous, about their character, their behavior, because that's a very important element within the Torah. So that, again, is a message that we can see resonating, as you'll hear tonight, as you read in your syllabus, as you discuss with your mentors, the importance that the Torah stresses on a person having integrity, a person having honesty, a person being able to really maximize who he is through bringing out the best of his character traits, which is hopefully authenticity and standing up for truth and justice. Thank you, Jeffrey. I got a fan club right there. Okay. So we have a big privilege to have with us a very special doctor, Dr. Viner. I'm going to read his bio. It's lengthy, but it's informative. Following his education at Yale University, the Chicago Medical School, Northwestern University Medical School of Psychiatry, residency, and the Chicago Institute of Psychoanalysis, Dr. Viner has over 4 decades of experience applying the clinical and research knowledge of neuroscience, psychiatry, and psychoanalysis to the challenge of creating meaningful and pragmatically effective treatment programs. Since 2005, Dr. Viner has been the founder and CEO and chief medical officer at Yellowbrick, a national referral center for intensive, comprehensive treatment of troubled emerging adults. Dr. Viner previously has served as the medical director for inpatient services at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine, Four Winds Chicago Hospital, and University Behavioral Health and Outpatient Group Practice. Dr. Viner has served on the faculties of Northwestern University, Feinberg School of Medicine, the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute, and the Rosalind Franklin Medical School and University of Health Sciences. He is secretary of the Board of Trustees of the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute and chair of the Ethics Committee at both the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute and the American Psychoanalytic Association. Dr. Viner has been board certified in psychiatry and neurology and forensic psychiatry and is a distinguished life fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. He is the recipient of the Illinois Psychiatric Society 2016 Award for Excellence and Innovation in Clinical Services. Dr. Viner is a parent to 4 daughters and 2 sons, and Saba to 7 grandchildren. For those that don't know, that means grandfather. So please give your undivided attention to Dr. Viner, and as you know, after he speaks, you will have the opportunity to ask some questions and answers.
So thank you, Rabbi Zalman, for that gracious introduction and for the invitation to have a discussion with you, the leaders for tomorrow. So this afternoon, my wife says to me, "You look nervous. You've given hundreds of talks to thousands of professionals. What are you possibly nervous about?" So I said first, well, I've never given this talk. I created it just for you guys. And then I said the truth, which is, this one really matters because of you. So let me start with a story. Oh, I'm going to talk a little bit about trust. Trust and character have a very intimate relationship. And so leaders need to be trustworthy, but they also need to trust those whom they serve. So I'm going to trust that when I ask you questions, you're actually going to respond, or else I'm going to stay nervous. I'd probably get more nervous. Okay? Is that a deal? We have an agreement? All right. Terrific. So when it was my bar mitzvah year, my parents came to me and they said, we'd like to give you a choice. Would you like to have a blowout party like your older brother? Or would you like to go to Israel for the summer? This was not a real choice. We're going to talk about some hard choices later. But I knew my parents. They would never not have a party. So I went to Israel. And I spent 3 months in Israel. It was right before the opening of Bar Ilan University. And we studied Judaism, we toured, we went all to the great ancient sites and holy sites. We had fun, it was terrific. And I came home and I got off the plane and I said to my parents, I want to be a rabbi. And my mother said, you're going to be a doctor. And we didn't talk about it after that. And that was that for a while. So I grew up in the projects in Brooklyn. That's like public housing, like bars on the window, cages for elevators, not like Bell Harbor. And we then moved to Long Island for when I was going to enter junior high and high school. And I was very successful in high school. I was president of my class for every year and student council president for senior year. I was a National Merit Scholar. I was captain of the baseball team. And I was 1% of my class. I just loved it. And I particularly loved baseball. Baseball was a team experience. I was kind of taken under the wing of the baseball coach who was a former New York Met. And he had a lot of connections with professional baseball. And by the time I was ready to graduate, kind of like you guys, I had three choices in front of me. So one was, my father owned a business, a very successful business at that time, making corrugated cartons, paper displays, things of that nature. And I'd been in his factories since I was a young boy. And I kind of loved walking around the factories and talking with all the employees. And it was dirty and grimy and real, and one choice was to go into business with my father, and he would have really loved that. What he would even have loved even more was for me to sign the 3 professional baseball contracts that were offered to me by the Mets, the Cleveland Indians, and the Cincinnati Reds. And like I said, I love baseball, and the glamour of it, the celebrity of it, the money of it. And money was very important in the value system of my family because my parents came from illiterate immigrants who, were the only people to leave Europe. The rest of their families were murdered in the Holocaust. They grew up as teenagers in the Depression. They then went to World War II. Money meant safety and power. And so there was a lot of appeal to going into professional baseball. But I had other experiences in high school. So my best friend, his father was a pediatrician who practiced in the house. That doesn't happen anymore. So, they had a garage, and he built this whole thing around the garage, and he was a pediatrician. And so there were always all these kids running around, when we would visit pretty much every day. And we, of course, went into the practice and made a mess and made ruckus. But I really witnessed how much he loved being a doctor. And I loved just the ruach of it all. And the whole atmosphere, the whole ambience was alive and loving, And I'd also read in Hebrew high school that Maimonides said that to be a physician is to be the finger of Hashem. 16-year-old boy reads that and that's for me, And so I made the decision to go to Yale, and I made it, because I was a true scholar. That scholarship being that I knew that, I'd researched that Babe Ruth said that Yale's baseball field was the best field in America other than Yankee Stadium. So that's why I went to Yale, okay? So, and I was pre-med, of course. And of course, my mother was very happy. And then I went to medical school, and when people would say, to my mom, how's Jesse doing? She'd say, he's going to be a doctor. And then I chose psychiatry. Why did I choose psychiatry? I chose psychiatry because when I did my psychiatric rotation, I did it in the kind of like the biggest hellhole you can imagine, Cook County Hospital. There's no resources. It's demoralizing, devastating. It was awful. Except there were people there, and there were troubled people there. And every 6 weeks, there'd be new medical students that would come, and they waited for the new victims. They were like vampires, and they would decide who's going to kidnap who. And I had this most intimate, wonderful relationship with this very troubled, schizophrenic young man, and it just sold me on the intimacy of psychiatry and that you'd never know enough. And I was okay with that. Okay. So I told my mother, I'm going into psychiatry. And she was devastated. So when people would say, "What's Jesse doing?" she'd say, "He's an MD." But she wouldn't say I was a psychiatrist. So then another reason I went into psychiatry was because the government was touting all the research that was going to go on, that it was going to be, the decade of the brain and all of that. And I'm very interested in neuroscience. That actually didn't happen until 20 years later. But around the turn of the century, we started to have neuroimaging techniques that helped us learn something about relationships. And what we learned is that when you engage in attuned, trustworthy, intimate relationships, it actually changes the way in which your brain works. Your brain starts to make different kinds of connections. And in fact, if you look at early studies like of people who were adopted at early ages, or people who have early traumatic losses, people's brains don't grow in the absence of secure attachments, okay? And so I used this information to kind of go back to war with my mother, right? And I said, "Mom, we're starting to learn how relationships and interactions change the actual structure and functioning of the brain." She said, "That's great." Because then when people said, "How's Jesse doing?" she said, "He's a neurosurgeon." So I've been doing it I've been in medicine for over 50 years, And so who wants to guess what I'm going to do if I ever retire? Somebody make a guess from that story. There you go. No. So let me ask you, what can we learn about character from those stories I've just told? What do these teach us about the development of character? Please.
It can lead you to make positive choices. It can lead you to make positive choices.
Character develops in the face of difficult choices that involve, most people think that as you grow older, it'll be easy. There's evil and there's good. Well, life comes in more gray than it does in black and white. And what I was trying to demonstrate in those stories, one of the things to demonstrate is that character develops in the face of competing values, competing desires, competing ambitions. And the struggle is to really connect with who you are and what your true inner priorities are, what really matters to you. Because most of life's decisions as you get older and life gets more complicated, they're not made at the 100% versus the 0%. They're made at the 51 to 49%. Look at our recent election. They're calling it a landslide, okay? And I'm fine with that. But it was only 3% difference, okay? Right? So what else can we learn from those stories? Please.
To trust yourself in your inner voice, because that ultimately what's going to make you your person.
If you're going to trust your inner voice, you actually have to raise it. Say it to them.
When you trust yourself, you have to raise that inner voice before you can actually act on it.
Very good. Anyone else? Yes?
You could be anything you put your mind to. Like you could be a baseball player or a rabbi and work in psychology.
I'm going to challenge that. Can you fly? No. I would put the two together, really, that you really have to know yourself well enough to know what your strengths and limits are. Or else you're going to, perhaps pursue an illusion about yourself. And there's only one way to find out. How do you find out what your true talents and limitations are? Please. Thank you. It doesn't happen on the top of the mountain contemplating your pipik. It happens through action. And Judaism is very much about challenging yourself through action. Something else that I understand from the life experiences I've shared is that when you make choices, and this again speaks to your comment about you can be anything, well, every time you choose one path, many paths are then lost. And a lot of young people get stuck wanting to keep all their options open. And I think there's something about character growth which has to do with not just accepting, but embracing that there are losses along the way that can actually, when embraced, provide the fuel for the path that you take. But there are losses. And as I was joking about with my parents, that there are times of separation where you may make choices that separate you from your parents and from others in your life who would want something different for you. And you may also need to separate from established norms. George Bernard Shaw, famous writer, used to say that reasonable people don't change the world. It's the unreasonable people who break the frontier and evolve the future. But that takes taking risks and being able to do that. Another thing is that there's a paradox of how do we grow ourselves? And we don't grow ourselves by focusing on ourselves. The paradox is the way we grow is that we try to reach higher beyond ourselves, and that the growth occurs kind of in a back loop kind of way. The last thing that I'll say about those stories has to do with the power of mentors. So my rabbis, my baseball coach, my parents, and all the both patients and teachers that I've had throughout my medical experiences, that the power of mentors, friends, and heroes is really crucial to how our character is going to develop. Of course, one of the aspects of human nature is that we become who we are in relationships, and that our tendency is to identify with those people we most respect, admire, and love. So choose your friends, choose your heroes, choose your mentors, choose your teachers wisely. And that the first message here about character is it's a dynamism between taking risks, knowing yourself, taking those actions that are going to grow yourself, and that while there may be aspects of separation and loss, that you also need to be attached to people that can be your mentors and heroes. I'm not a chacham. I don't think that's considered by Maimonides as one of the tests.
With his father and like the idol worshiping?
Leaving, yes, the lech lecha, right. So the other one, which remember I'm a psychoanalyst, so the reason you're not mentioning this one is the circumcision, right? So, and he had to let Ishmael go. Right. So let's again look at these tests. Why does Hashem, what are the lessons for Abraham's character development in these tests?
Trust.
Say more.
Your actions.
Well, let's stay here a little bit.
Hashem testing Avram to see if he can fully trust him to the point where if he listens to what he tells him, Hashem will set up his future in the right path.
Right. That most of the important decisions you're going to make that are going to shape who you are do not have a certain outcome. And so how do you face circumstances that you think are right for you, but may not work out well. You know, how do you face a circumstance where you're told, take your son, your only son, the one you love, and bring him up, you know, to the mount, when, hey, he was supposed to be the future. You promised me the future. This doesn't make sense to me. It's uncertain what's going to happen here. And so one important lesson of Abraham's test is you have to have trust in something beyond the rational reality that's in front of you. And where does that come from? It comes from, I think, a sense of purpose. And where does purpose come from? It comes from knowing that you matter and that you can make a difference. Okay? So having strength and trust in the face of uncertainty, I think, is one of the important lessons from Abraham's test. Anybody got an idea about another?
Leading your normal life, completely different life.
Right. It's not just leaving your life, you're actually shedding a former self. You know, where, remember, there's security in that former self. You know, it actually takes, you know, there's studies in mammals and humans that to change the default networking of the brain takes repetition over at least 120 days. Every day. What I love to say about that is, so on January 8th last year, 2024, NPR announced that only 8% of people were still keeping their New Year's resolutions. It's really hard to change, right? So it takes an enormous amount of strength and courage to leave one's former self. What else is in this series of tests by Hashem? Please.
Was it also humility? Like, he had to make himself sort of less and like nullify to Hashem in order to do these things?
Yes, humility is probably the most important aspect of character, because without humility, you actually can't receive anything from anyone else. You know, the struggle between Moses and Pharaoh, it's about the, you know, existential struggle between arrogance and humility, right? So thank you. Any other ideas about the 10 tests? So that's a characteristic, but how are you relating it to the tests?
You have strength to do every test.
Mm-hmm.
Go through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would loop that into what was said previously about the strength to take risks. Yeah. Two other things that occur to me. One has to do with that when he arrived in Canaan, there was a famine. Okay, and he didn't let that stop him. And I think the message there is that when you have an internal value, an eternal purpose, an eternal goal, that it doesn't matter what the external characteristics are. Humans have an enormous potential to rationalize behavior. It is very easy to say, you know what, famine, I'll just, wait until, 7 years until it's over, and then I'll start talking to people about God. Abraham didn't do that. Abraham didn't allow himself to be influenced by what was going on around him. Okay. The last thing I think is, there are, it's harder to understand this portion, of the Torah where, he presents Sarah as his sister rather than his wife. And what lesson can we learn about that?
He had faith.
He definitely had faith that it would work out somehow. He was just trying to, thread the needle, right? But go ahead. What about their relationship? What can we learn about their relationship from what he was doing? Yeah.
Trust.
Go ahead. What kind of trust here?
Sarah had trust in Abram that, like, I mean, that it would be able to go through and she would be safe. Right?
Yeah.
She had a lot of trust in him.
Yeah, I'm going to play with that a little bit and say they knew they were in it together. You know, that, again, another basic take-home message here is character doesn't develop by being alone, okay? And it involves a kind of vulnerability with people who you come to know you can trust. And I think that's what, you know, I read into what the way in which they were playing that very dangerous, you know, circumstance. That they knew they were in it together and they were going to get out of it together. Okay, and that involves a kind of, you know, vulnerability and trust and intimacy that promotes. You know, you can't take those kinds of supported risks if you don't have somebody or several people who have your back. Okay. Okay. All right, let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about, I think Rabbi Zalman mentioned this a little bit, you know, that Judaism has a lot of characters who've got a lot of character, right? So we talked about mentors, right? Well, we got a Torah that's full of them. So let me ask you who some of your, you know, heroes are from the Torah and what they have to teach us about character. What are their essential qualities that Hashem is saying to us, you know, try to cultivate this?
Moshe, he was considered the most humble person he was.
Right, right.
And as a leader, he didn't really brag about leadership and was more focused on helping Jewish people.
Right. Thank you for that second part, because as we talked about earlier, it's only if you're humble can you receive, right? But the other part of that humility as a leader is to know that leaders serve. Okay, people don't serve the leader. Collectively, we serve a higher goal, a higher purpose, a higher mission. And leaders who serve are the leaders who are going to be most successful. Because that allows those who, you know, the world's full of all different kinds, and we need every one of them. Every role matters, you know, and so we need people who are going to follow leaders. But if the leader doesn't trust them and doesn't serve them, they're not going to sign up. You know? Okay, so that's Moshe.
Rivka, because it says she was a rose among thorns and she didn't get influenced by other people.
I didn't hear.
Rivka, she didn't get influenced by other people.
Right. Others?
Yosef, also, same thing.
Mm-hmm. That's why he's called the tzaddik. Mm-hmm.
Roughly meaning, kind of what you were saying before, how the leader served, so she made herself available to all like the future generations as well, for them to come and pray by her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing I think about with Rachel is why we're all here tonight. You know, she was devoted to the next generation. You know, and without the next generation, there is no mission accomplished. Right? So the love and devotion of children is represented by Rachel. Who else? Please.
Sarah, she had like a really tough life. She got like kidnapped twice and like couldn't like give birth because she was very old. I feel like, and she like Rashi said that she like had all 127 years of her life were all good. So she kept staying positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, except when she gave birth, she turned into being 20, you know? Should only happen to the rest of us. Yeah, the other thing I think about with both Avraham and Sarah, they represent the character attributes of compassion, kindness, generosity. Those are really important characteristics for just to be a good Jew, but especially in a leader. You know, that when you have power, you can sometimes forget, you know, that other people make mistakes, you know, may not have learned what you've learned. You know, they may not have had the privileges you've had. And so compassion and generosity is what helps people to recover, you know, from their limitations and move forward.
Shlomo, he was the wisest and he did everything, like he tried everything and he, after all that, he took it and made it for us to like learn about what life is really about.
He's one of my favorites too. The quote I have is that Shlomo said, "The wise man falls 1,000 times, the fool only once." You know, that's about, and I think Yaakov represents this as well. You know, why does Yaakov say to Pharaoh, "Oi," you know, Pharaoh asked him, you know, how old are you? And he says, "Oi, have I suffered, you know, so many times." What he's really saying is, I've accumulated such deep wisdom from, you know, the life that I have lived and the struggles and challenges that I have overcome. You know, so I'm right on with Shlomo. Another one of my favorites is Devorah. Okay, and it's very much relevant to you guys, which is that she represents that Hashem calls upon ordinary people to do the extraordinary. And that's all of us. We're all ordinary, yet we're all unique, and we all can do the extraordinary. But we can't do it without growing our character and having the right kinds of connections. So what practices does our tradition teach that help us promote character? Now that's probably oh, you got an idea. Okay, I was going to say it's too general a question. You might not know what I'm talking about. But go ahead, please.
First is like the basic 70 things that you keep, like Noah, 7 from Noah. That's like the basic that all people follow. And it's just like morality, but also like kindness, chesed, doing mitzvah. All of that just encompasses what it is to be a well-rounded, good person. I think just doing the Torah, all of it.
Did everybody hear her? Because she stole my show, you know. You heard her? Okay. All right, so you mentioned the commandments, right? So having a moral code that you make a commitment to, right? You also mentioned chesed, right? So chesed, empathy, love thy neighbor, okay? All right. What else? What are the other practices, things that we are told to do as Jews that help us build character?
Have a rabbi.
Yes, have a rabbi. Right, from Pirkei Avot. Get yourself a teacher. Get yourself a rabbi. Right, have good mentors. What else?
For instance, speaking bad about
No
anyone.
lashon hara. Right, because that puts evil into the world that you can't control. You know. Yes. Well, love your neighbor, right?
Love and serve Hashem.
Okay.
Don't have a
How might you do that practically?
How to make it practical, your phone, because it's like you're worshiping something else.
Mhm.
And loving Hashem is just following what He says, doing what He said, everything you do, like try to be the best version of yourself, and then like apply Hashem to everything.
Good. Some other ideas. You all know this. So, tzedakah, right? That, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said that, you want to experience Hashem, you want to know and feel His presence, you want to know He exists. You know how to do that? Give. When you give, then you will experience being created in God's image. Okay, so tzedakah is very important, okay, for character development. It's important for a lot of other reasons too. Okay. Another one. Oh, please.
Teshuva.
There you go. That was next on my list. Okay. Can you say why you think that matters?
Because it's returning back to your true self,
Excellent.
repenting, and like going back to your roots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought of it more like a psychoanalyst, which is there are two emotions that most interfere with character development. And those are not necessarily. Because, when we talk about taking risks, it doesn't mean not being afraid. When we're talking about courage and strength, it's guilt and shame. Shame causes people to hide, so that's obviously taking us out of the direction of engagement and action and connection. And guilt robs us of our light. It takes our energy away from us. Okay? And so tshuva, particularly tshuva in the communal settings that Judaism provides, I think help us become more self-aware and work through the issues associated with guilt and shame that then free us to do all the things that we've been talking about thus far. Okay. Trustworthiness. As I was saying earlier, as a leader, you have to be trustworthy and you have to trust others. You got to be honest. You got to be reliable. You don't show up at 7:12 for a talk that's supposed to start at 7, right? You got to be accountable. That it's not just you, supervise them. People you serve supervise you too. Okay? And you got to do what you say. You got to keep your commitments. And if you're going to change a commitment, you have to be transparent. You got to say, well, I thought that was the right road for us, but here's what's happened since, and here's why I'm going in a different direction. And I know that upsets certain people, and you allow that, and you hold that with them. Okay? The last one I'll say is gratitude. How many times in our daily davening, do we thank God? Right? Well, there's a lot of research, neuroscience research, that shows that gratitude helps grow character. It also keeps you healthy. You will live longer as a leader if you are grateful, even for the troubles that Hashem throws you. And then I'm going to tell you another story, and then I'll stop. So January 26, 1999, I woke up at 4 in the morning with a headache that felt like a tank was rolling over my head. And it wasn't because, I thought I made the wrong bet on the Super Bowl. Okay? And I was so nauseous that I crawled out of bed and I was like crawling along the floor to run away from my nausea. I know that doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it was. So paramedics, ER, ICU later. Apparently I had a stroke in the junction between the medulla and the pons in the midbrain. You probably haven't taken, neuroanatomy yet. But this is the part of our brain that controls our heart and our breathing. And the neurosurgery department at Northwestern Medical School said they'd never seen anybody survive a stroke in their 200 collective years of practice in the department. They said a blood vessel broke, and then it closed, and it locked unto itself. This gets your attention. Okay? Because my heart rate was down to 18. I was breathing 6 times a minute. And it's also the place where arousal, awakening, is governed. And so red blood cells, irritate the brain. So I was up for 9 days straight, and I was not tired, and there was nothing good on TV in the middle of the night back in those days. And so finally they thought I was safe enough to go home. And I was up the first night. The second night, walking around the house, like, what am I going to do about this? And I'd never really done this before, but I had heard somewhere, somehow it occurred to me, go to www.thewall.org, which is a camera from Esha Torah onto the wall, the Kotel. Okay. So I do that, and I'm watching the picture and people going back and forth. This is like 3 in the morning, and so like it's late morning in Jerusalem. And I'm looking at the webpage, and there's this flashing light that says, send a message. And I say, are you talking to me? And so what they do is you send an email, and a bucher from Esha Torah will go and put a note in the wall. And if you're a person with character, you'll give them $25 or whatever you want to give. Okay? And so I wrote to Hashem and I said, I don't know why you did this, but clearly you don't want to ruin the neighborhood up there, but you must have something else in mind, and I'm going to devote myself to figuring it out. And that's how I started Yellowbrick. That I gathered my experience from working in an academic medical center, working in a private psychiatric hospital system in 2 different formats, inpatient and outpatient. And Yellowbrick came to me as a way to serve people who were underserved among our young population who are troubled. So my last message to you is, when God sends you his message, respond. So thank you for your attention.
Have you ever had any doubts when deciding or developing your character?
Question is, have I ever had any doubts? So anybody who tells you the answer to that is no is a liar. Okay. We tend to think of doubt as a bad thing, as a weakness or as a limitation. I think doubts are actually a strength because they get you to reflect and get you to apply critical thinking, which is a really important characteristic of leaders. So one of my friends and close colleagues for 50 years, we went to college together. So she is a consultant to the Army, and she wrote their book on how to assess leaders. And one of the things that they look at, is what you wouldn't think is the kind of icon for the Army, where you think, they're like, gung-ho and never doubt themselves. But the leaders who have doubt, have questions, who challenge themselves, who are self-aware, and know that, as I was saying in the beginning, that tough decisions, it's not always clear. You gotta wipe some of the dust off, to know where the ground is, So yes, I've had many doubts every day, and I think it's a good thing. But it's a great question too. Thank you.
Did your parents end up supporting your decision?
Eventually. So one of the jokes about me, my mother, and the issue of becoming a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst is, while she's giving me such a hard time and telling us that she's going into Manhattan 3 days a week because she loves the museums and the opera, she was in analysis. So you figure that out. My dad would brag more about my being offered professional baseball contracts than he would about me being a doctor. But that's not to say he wasn't proud of that as well. But I never doubted my parents loved me. And they were from a generation that really sacrificed their lives in a blood, sweat, guts, tears kind of way, came from nothing, to, help their family, not just me and my brother, but extended family, have opportunities and a platform for life, They really suffered on our behalf. So if they were, disagreeing or disappointed or upset, it's okay. Big picture, big picture. He was first.
In what way were you able to communicate with him that you felt really like something hard?
So think of the patriarchs and the matriarchs by being humble, open, interested in them as people, not considering yourself superior, being grateful for the privilege that they invite you into their life, being curious, knowing that, you don't understand, just wanting to have that experience together. Relationship, people think like when you hear, oh, the placebo effect is 40%, right? And like, as if that's fake. The placebo effect is the impact of relationships on physiology. That a good relationship will change the way in which the body and the brain function towards health, right? So when they did a multi-center trial on the standard antidepressant for treatment of depression, it came out less than the placebo effect, because in research, it's sterile and there's no real relationship emphasis. You're in the study, you take the pill, go home, come back, fill out the form, all that. Okay, so if you are open to those people, they too will be, vulnerable, humble, grateful.
I was wondering what challenges you had in starting your nonprofit and how did you overcome them?
I didn't hear you.
I was wondering what challenges you had in starting Yellowbrick and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. So I think you referred to it as a nonprofit, whereas we do have a foundation that is a nonprofit, but the actual treatment centers, there's actually 3 different treatment centers that I own, but they're all for-profit. Well, that's a funny story too. I must have had great ancestors, because I don't merit all the blessings I've had, because there are many times, and I'll just give you one example, where Yellowbrick should have closed, hands down, no, question about it. So for example, we opened in 2006, right? And so we were very vulnerable financially. And in 2008, the world collapsed financially. I walked into my CFO's office that morning, and I said, we're going out of business, okay? Because people pay for treatment like this out of assets. They don't pay for it out of income, okay? And, the stock market went down 50%, okay? But we continued to grow. I think that's Hashem's blessing, Every time we have financial troubles, because things cycle, my wife says to me, maybe it was that last rabbi's kid we treated, that's what Hashem, why he wanted Yellowbrick to be created, and that kid's gone, he's done well, now Hashem doesn't care if you make it anymore, So we've had lots of troubles, but Hashem got us through.
We can stay here all night, but we have the last question, and then we have a...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you saw my x-rays, you would not be asking that question. No, no more baseball for me, but I have 2 grandsons that are lunatics about baseball. So I watch a lot of baseball with them playing. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you so much.